Living next to the woods can be creepy. It's not for everyone because you will see things, you will hear things. It can get very weird. And there is a particular set of rules that if you find yourself living next to the woods or the forest, that you should follow. Now, the first rule is at nighttime, always lock your doors, always close your curtains. Also, at nighttime, never look out the window facing the woods. If you hear a knock at your door at nighttime, do not answer it, especially if it is your back door. You will see lights coming from the woods. Do not follow them. Do not try and communicate with them. Just ignore them. And the most important thing you must remember is that anything you see outside, most likely it's not real. You are not seeing it or you are not hearing it. Now, this story comes out of Tennessee. There's this man named Christian. Christian said that at one point in time, he grew up in this farmhouse that was out in the boonies. And he said they lived deep, deep in the woods, and it was a dirt road that took several miles to get to their house. And they literally had no neighbors around. Well, he said when they first moved in, there was a lot of weird stuff that would happen. For instance, the dogs didn't want to go anywhere near the woods. They would get to the tree line and they would turn around. And it was like they were afraid of something. They also noticed these deer. They would come into their yard at night and they would just be staring out into the woods like they were scared of something. And then one night, something very strange happened. So it was about 11 o'clock at night. And on the back door, they hear boom, 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 a knock. And that's when his father goes to the back door and he opens it up. There was no one out there. He said as he looked out into the woods, he started to hear screams. And it sounded like someone was in trouble. So he said he got up and him and his father went outside and they started looking around. They couldn't see anybody. So eventually they called the police. And the police came out and they searched the area. They couldn't find anyone. Well, on a regular basis, they started hearing screams outside their house coming from the woods. And every night, something would be knocking on their back door. A few times, they found the back door wide open. The other weird thing that started happening is Christian's brother started having these weird nightmares. And not only was he having nightmares, he started to sleepwalk. And he would get up from his bed, he'd walk down the hallway into the kitchen and out the back door. And right before he would get into the woods, his dad or his mom would stop him and wake him up. And, this happened several times. Well, eventually his father put up like a camera outside because he was trying to figure out who's knocking on the back door. And one day he looks at the video and he sees his son going out the back door. And he notices he just starts looking around like he's looking for something out in the woods, like something was calling him. And finally, his father comes running out and stops him. So the father started to get really creeped out. He told Christian and his brothers and sisters, do not go out in the woods. And he said that's when one night there was a very loud banging sound coming from the back door. And it was almost like someone was trying to get in this door. So he said his father grabs a baseball bat. He goes to the back door and he opens it. And he looks around and out of the corner of his eyes, he sees something moving in the woods. So he said his father started to make his way towards the wood line. And that's when he sees something run back further into the woods. So his father starts to go into the woods down this trail. And he said he could see this thing from a distance. And he noticed when he would kind of move, it would move. Or when he would turn to the right, it would turn to the right. Or when he would turn to the left, it would turn to the left. And he said whatever he would do, whatever movement he would do, this thing would follow. And he said that's when he realized whatever this was, it was almost like looking at a mirror. This thing was copying him. It was following his every movement. So his father turns around, takes off running through the woods, gets back in the house, and tells everyone, get in the vehicle, we are leaving. And they moved that night and left everything behind in the house. And he said still to this day, he has nightmares whenever he's near the woods because he still thinks about his time living in that place. Now, Central Illinois is considered home to a lot of creepy and weird things. I consider it to be one of the most haunted places in the United States. Now, the Peoria area is sort of a hotspot for activity. Grandview Drive in Peoria Heights is considered to be one of the most beautiful drives in America, but it's also the most haunted. Now, the earliest ghost reports go back to 1907 when it was reported in the newspaper that on a nightly basis, people riding in their horse and carriages were being chased by a specter. The reports continue much after this, though, that there is a ghost who's seen on Grandview Drive that chases cars. There are reports of these lights, these orbs that are seen on the hillside. and when people approach them, they seem to move or disappear. There are phantom joggers, phantom cars. There is an old legend at the end of Grandview Drive that when you drive up the hill at night, you might see a man standing in the middle of the road. There are people who said they've heard Indian chants coming from the woods or disembodied voices. Now, the oldest legend of this area is that of the Peoria Heights Water Tower, which is on the beginning of the Grandview Drive. Now, it's this tall red water tower with an observation deck on top that you can actually go and look and see views of the Illinois River. But the story goes in the 1970s, supposedly there was this high school girl who was distraught after her boyfriend broke up with her on prom night. So she went to the tower and went to the top and jumped off the side. It's said that when she fell to the ground, her blood spattered on the side of this tower. And despite efforts trying to clean this, they could not get the blood stain off, so they painted the tower red. Now, there's no documentation to actually prove this story, but still, there are people who report seeing the ghost of a young girl. In fact, I talked to someone who worked at the tower, and they said at night they would have to go up to the observation deck and make sure that it was completely clear. Well, when they go to the top observation deck, they see a woman standing by the ledge. And when they go to tell her it's closing time, she simply vanishes. So after that night, she did not want to go up there at night alone. There are people in the area who've reported they were sitting in the bench and they seen a woman walk by and sort of vanish right in front of their eyes. It's also reported along Grandview Drive of a ghost ship that is believed to be the steamboat, the Columbia, that had crashed on the Illinois River and rivaled the Titanic in people that had passed away. Now, not too far from Grandview Drive, along Prospect, you will find the downtown Peoria Heights area, which there are a lot of businesses located in very old buildings. One specifically is that of Sullivan's, which is considered by a lot of previous workers to be very haunted. Everything from bottles falling off shelves to seeing people out of the corner of their eyes to workers being afraid to go down in the basement. It's definitely believed that this place was possibly built on an old Indian burial ground. Now, we also are home to one of the oldest historical cemeteries in the area, known as the Springdale Cemetery. A lot of Peoria's past residents are buried here, and it's said that they still return to view the beautiful city that they loved. One of the more seen ghosts in this cemetery is that of the White Lady, who is often seen near the creek and pavilion, bent over a tombstone crying, and when people approach her to see if she's all right, she turns around and is often seen without a face. She's also said to be seen running along the hills and the rows of tombstones, gallantly strolling through the cemetery. There have been several reports of people seeing dogs that they follow into an area that is the old pet cemetery. There are reports of this black car that's seen late at night driving around when the cemetery gates were locked, and this is known as the Phantom Car. There is a mausoleum that a lot of kids believed if you went there at midnight and you knocked on it, something would not knock back. There are also reports of a pond that is seen in the middle of the cemetery, except no pond exists. However, in the 1930s and 1940s, there was a pond in this exact location, but people have reported swimming in this pond and fishing and, having leisurely activities at night, only to discover there was no pond in the cemetery. But probably the scariest of all the ghosts in Springdale Cemetery is that of the caretaker's ghost, which is said to be seen in the back of the cemetery and chase young teenagers attempting to visit the cemetery at night. Some of the other haunted locations in Peoria are that of Emack and Bolios, which is downtown. Apparently, the old owner who had fell down the stairs one day and passed away is seen in and around this building and often seen late at night. There is another legend known as California Road in Pekin, and many stories and legends have spawned out of this area, but supposedly if you're driving down this road at night, you will see a young woman walking on the road. If you give her a ride, she will vanish, or sometimes she vanishes right in front of your own eyes. The other areas in Peoria that tend to be most haunted is there is an old cabin that is said to be by the river, and a lot of teenagers would sneak there at night and go along these trails. And it is documented that someone had taken their life there and was found by some young teenagers But people say when you go there, still to this day, you can hear screams, knocking sounds, and people have even been reported being chased by a guy out of the um, cabin. Now, the Bartonville Insane Asylum, which at one time was this huge facility along Pfeiffer Road. Well, the oldest story is that of a bookbinder who was actually a patient at the Bartonville Insane Asylum, and he was given the responsibility of burying the patients who had passed away. And it said on his funeral, there were all of these people in attendance, and they had witnessed him standing next to a tree, crying as he often did when he would bury the other patients. And even Dr. Zeller himself wrote that he witnessed this along with hundreds of other people. And still to this day, people say you can see the ghost of old Bookbinder hanging out near the elm tree next to where he's buried. There are many stories that come out of the old insane asylum itself where people would say they would see nurses walking the hallways. They would hear screams. There was a teddy bear supposedly on the fourth or fifth floor that would move by itself, that no one knew where it came from. But definitely going there at night, you would get a feeling of dread or a sensation that you were being watched. Peoria is also home to many UFO sightings, especially along Grandview Drive and the Illinois River. Most famously, there was a young son and his dad who were driving in their truck one night, just a little bit outside of Peoria, when they seen this bright light in the sky, and they noticed it was following their truck. Well, the next thing they knew, they were near the Quad Cities, and they were going in the wrong direction, and they had no idea how they had got to this point in time. And it was one of the well-known documented reports of alien abduction back in the 1980s. So what do you think? Do you have a ghost story about Central Illinois that you'd like to tell? There's this girl named Jennifer, and she had a cat named Francisco. Now, Francisco was this black cat that was a stray that she rescued one day, and he loved being outside. So during the day, she would let him roam around outdoors, and then at night, let him back in. Well, as usual, one morning, he goes to the back door, starts scratching and meowing, so she lets Francisco out. Well, that night, Francisco never comes back home. So she's very, worried. The next night, right? Francisco once again does not come back, which is unusual because like every night he would return. Finally, the third night, she is just frantic and like, I don't know if something happened to him. I hope he returns. And then at the back door, she hears meowing and something scratching. And when she goes to open the door, there's Francisco. So she's so excited to see him that she picks him up and starts giving him a hug. However, he doesn't like this. He, lets off a loud meow and then just jumps down on the ground and like takes off running. Which was odd because Francisco was always this very affectionate cat. The next day, she started noticing that Francisco was acting really weird. He was like tearing up things. He wasn't using the litter box, but he was going like all over the floor. And he just seemed very reluctant to be close to Jennifer. Well, that night, she goes to bed. And she wakes up in the middle of the night to Francisco, who is sitting on her chest, just staring at her. And he's got his claws extended, pushed into her skin to where it actually hurts. And she's like, Francisco, what are you doing? What are you doing? And she said the look that Francisco gave her was like he wanted to hurt her. So she, lifts him up, throws him on the ground, and he just takes off running out of the room. The next morning when she wakes up, she sees that Francisco has completely destroyed the entire house, ripped up pictures and the couch and everything, which once again was unlike Francisco. So she says, you know what? Tomorrow, Francisco, I'm taking you to the vet. We're getting you checked out because something's not right. So that night, she decides she's going to put Francisco in a kennel. So she puts him in the kennel in the front living room, and she goes to bed. About 12:30 in the morning, she hears like a crashing sound, and she hears her front door opened. So she's like freaking out, like, did someone just break in the house or what's going on? So she grabs a baseball bat, she walks out down the hallway and goes into the living room, and she can see that the front door is clearly open. She searches the house, she doesn't find anybody. But when she goes back in the living room to close the door, she sees Francisco's kennel is open and he's now missing. So she runs right away back to her room to call the police. because she thinks someone has stolen it. And as she's walking down the hallway, Francisco jumps out at her and just starts attacking her. And he's clawing her and he's biting her. And she throws him on the ground and he comes running back and just keeps attacking her. Well, she noticed that there was this crucifix that she had been given as a young girl in her church that she had hanging on the wall that had been knocked down by Francisco. And she grabs the crucifix and puts it next to Francisco. He jumps down and takes off running out the front door. Well, she closes up the front door and is like, Francisco is not coming back. He's on his own. He can live on the streets. Well, about a day or two later, she ends up getting a call from her friend who said she's coming over. She has something important she has to tell her. So her friend shows up and she's got this bag and she comes inside and she goes, I don't know how to break this to you, but about a couple days ago, I had found Francisco and he had been hit by a car. I had him cremated. Here's his collar and here's everything, but I didn't know how to break the news to you because I knew you'd be so distraught. And instantly Jennifer is like, well, who was that cat that was inside my house? Because it had the exact same collar that her friend had brought her. There was this girl who went to Juilliard. She was a violinist and she started failing her classes and couldn't get any gigs. So she started to say, to her friends, I would do anything to be famous and get gigs. But she didn't realize who was listening. It wasn't just her friends, but also the devil. Now, she goes to bed one night and she has this really vivid dream. There's this beautiful man. He comes in her room and he's naked. And he says, I will give you fame and fortune. All you have to do is give me your soul. And she goes, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And so all of a sudden this contract appears right before her. And he says, let me see your hand. And he cuts her finger and says, sign this contract with your blood. So she signs the contract. And all of a sudden the contract, he picks it up and puts it in his hand. And it turns to flames and then falls on the floor as a bunch of ashes. So she wakes up and she's, a little bothered by the dream, but thinks it's just a dream until she looks at her finger. There's a cut. And on the floor is a pile of ashes. So fast forward several years, she becomes famous and starts traveling all over the world and lands all these huge gigs. But then she starts getting involved in partying and she contracts AIDS. Now, she ends up to the point where she's on her last journey of life and she's in the hospital and she's talking to her mother, who's Filipino, and she tells her this story about the dream she had. And instantly her mother says, we need to talk to a priest. We need to call a priest. So she calls up a priest and talks to the priest. And he says, I will come there right away and speak with your daughter. So the priest comes and he comes in the hospital room and he says, you made a blood pact with the devil. And in order to break that, you have to make a blood pact with God. So you need to sign this creed with your blood. And the doctor overhears this, is like, no, she can't do that. She has AIDS. And he goes, she has to do this. You can leave the room, but she has to do this. So he, cuts her finger and has her sign the creed. And instantly she flatlines. And the doctor comes running in and, he's angry with the priest. The mother's angry. And about 15 minutes had passed. And she gets up out of the bed. And she's fine. They run a bunch of tests. She has no AIDS, no HIV. She's completely clean. And she goes on to live a normal life. Believe it or not, there is a doll more terrifying than Annabelle. Now, this story didn't get much news coverage, and not much is known about it. But it took place in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica. And the story goes, there was this husband and wife. Now, the husband worked as an architect, and he would often travel overseas. Now, their son, he really wanted a Teletubby doll. And at this time in the 90s, there was this crazy obsession, and everyone wanted to find this doll. But you couldn't get it at any store. It was sold out. So the father, who's overseas on a work trip, he finds one of these Teletubby dolls, and he buys it. And he brings it back to the son. Well, the first couple of days, the son's happy, he loves this toy, and he's playing with it all the time. But then one night, everyone was in bed. The mother, she wakes up, and she starts tossing and turning, and she couldn't sleep. So she got up out of bed, and she walked towards the kitchen. As she's in the hallway, she hears this loud banging sound coming from her son's room. So she immediately goes to his room, she opens the door, and she finds the son with his legs up on the bed, hanging off, and right next to him is this Teletubby doll. So she says to her son, like, what are you doing? Why are you out of bed? Like, what's going on? What was that sound? And the son's like, it was nothing. It was nothing. So the mom picks him up, puts him back into bed, and she takes the doll and she sets it over on this chair. As she's walking out of the bedroom, this doll started to talk. The voice box started to go off. And she thought that was strange because her son's in bed, the doll's all the way over on this chair, and there was nothing pressing the button. So she's like, okay, that's kind of eerie. She closes the door and she goes into the kitchen. And over the next couple of weeks, she keeps hearing noises at night in her son's room. And when she goes in there, she finds her son always on the floor or, hanging off the bed. And when she asks her son, what's wrong, he says nothing. And then she starts to notice the dog. The dog did not like this doll. And every time it would go around the doll, it would growl. So one day she's in the kitchen sitting drinking some coffee. She starts hearing the dog growling. So she tells the dog, just leave the doll alone, like get away from it. And all of a sudden this dog lets out a yelp and it starts crying and it books it into the kitchen and goes right under her legs. And when she comes out into the hallway where this doll is, she sees the doll sitting in the chair. And that kind of freaked her out a little bit, but she thought, I'm just imagining things, like it's nothing. So this strange stuff kept going on where her son would, fall out of the bed and the dog would be scared. And then one night she gets up out of bed. She thinks that, I better go check on my son. So she goes towards his room, but in another room, she starts hearing the dog growling. And she thinks, why is the dog like in this other room? Like, how did he get in there? So she goes to the bedroom. She opens the door. The dog isn't in there, but there is the doll on the floor. So instantly she said, you know what? Like, I'm done with this doll. I'm getting rid of it. So the next day she takes this doll and she gives it to a thrift store. And after a couple months, like everything is fine. But then one day she receives a phone call and she starts hearing the voice box of that doll saying, hi, hello, and then giggling. And for months, she would continuously receive phone calls from this doll, from a random number. And still to this day, no one knows what happened to that doll or where it went, but it was known as one of the creepiest doll stories in the United States.